Lidia. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello. My name is Susan Allen Ford, and I'm joined tonight by my fellow co-host, Sarah Schaefer Walton, who's an assistant professor of English and director of digital humanities at Marshall University in West Virginia. Our technical director for this episode is Maisie Ferguson, who's an English major and music minor at the University of Kansas. Since 2019, Jane Austen and Company has aimed to provide top-notch programming related to Jane Austen. We've had past series on everyday science in the Regency, Asia and the Regency, reading with Jane Austen, Austen and the Brontes, race and the Regency. All previous episodes are freely available on our website, janeaustenandco.org.
And tonight we are picking back up our series that we began earlier this year on music and the Regency. And in February, we kicked things off with Jeff Nigro's talk on Georgian fangirls and the influence that Italian castrati had on Regency music in England. Then Gillian Dooley discussed music in Austen's life and work, including some of what she would have played and sang. And then Catherine Libben moved our series outward to women and musical education during this period. And most recently, Laura Klein discussed the evolution of keyboard music during this period and considered the music Austen was practicing when she was writing.
Speaking of Laura Klein, we want to extend a heartfelt thank you to her for the recording of the lovely intro music you heard at the top of tonight's event. It was Sonata, Movement 2, Andante con moto by Domenico Cori from a selection of choice music for the harpsichord and piano in the Austen Family Music Book Collection. We'll be collaborating with Laura shortly for some exciting musical additions to Jane Austen's Desk, a digital humanities project with a public focus and part of the Jane Austen Collaborative Incorporation. Some of you may be familiar with Jane Austen's Desk or JAD. JAD is a window into Austen's world for scholars, fans, and general readers to explore and learn, as well as connect and collaborate. An interpretive vision of Austen's writing space, as well as her traveling desk, JAD hosts many interactive resources, including historical, literary, material, philosophical, and soon musical sources, all made possible by your support. We'll include a slide at the end of our event today where you can get connected and learn more.
And now I'm excited to introduce tonight's speaker. Lidia Chang is a flutist and musicologist whose work examines the intersection of gender, literature, and print culture, organology, and music performance practices in Europe during the long 18th century. In 2023, Lidia found her dream job at Colorado College as an assistant professor in the music department. Lidia has served as the managing editor for Women in Music, a journal of gender and culture, and has presented her research at the American Musical Instrument Society, the Galpin Society, the American Musicological Society, the North American British Music Studies Association, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and at the Jane Austen Society of North America's annual and regional meetings. Lidia is a member of JASNA's board of directors, and next year she'll be a plenary speaker at JASNA's annual general meeting in Tucson.
Wow. Well, before Lydia begins her talk, our technical director, Maisie, will explain how you can send in questions during and after this talk.
All right, hello again. Welcome to YouTube, our streaming platform. If you'd like to leave a comment or ask a question, please use the comment feature on the sidebar. We'll collect your comments throughout the performance, and during the Q&A, Lydia will answer them. So please get those questions and comments in because we love to hear from you. You will need to log into your Google or YouTube account to post using the comment feature on the sidebar. If you do not have a YouTube or Google account, that's perfectly fine. You can submit your questions to info@janeaustenandcompany.org, and we'll collect questions there as well as ask them for you.
And now, without further ado, we present Lydia Chang in her presentation on frivolity, foppery, and the English gentleman at music.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm so honored to be addressing you all. And yeah, away we go. Well, we'll start with foppery. There's only one mention of it in all of Austen's published works. And I think it will come as no surprise to this audience that it was made in reference to none other than Frank Churchill. Next slide, please. Emma's very good opinion of Frank Churchill was a little shaken the following day by hearing that he was gone off to London merely to have his hair cut. A sudden freak seemed to have seized him at breakfast, and he had sent for a chaise and set off, intending to return to dinner, but with no more important view that appeared, we know what really he was doing, than having his hair cut. There was certainly no harm in his traveling 16 miles twice over on such an errand, but there was an air of foppery and nonsense in it, which she could not approve. Now, for the uninitiated, fop is one of the myriad of words that coalesced in the 18th century in print culture in Britain around effeminate male characters, both real and fictional. Other names included daffodil, smart, dandy, fribble, all kinds of words. Coxcomb, another one. Actually, Frank gets called this also in Emma. And the fop was a man who was concerned with the trivial sorts of things that were often supposed to be of interest to women. And in addition to that, they often embodied the worst kinds of characteristics that women were thought to embody, such as being very vain, being a bit fickle, being perhaps undisciplined. And so this sort of negative, this sort of failed masculinity was coded effeminate in feminine terms. So I'm focusing on Frank tonight, not just because he was such a fop, but because he is the only one of Austen's gentlemen who displays his musical skills. He's the only one of Austen's gentlemen who we actually see and hear playing, well, in his case, singing. Indeed, he is the only gentleman in fiction from this period whose musical performance is described in such detail. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. I am dying to know if there are other gentlemen out there. The next one after Frank, who I'm aware of, is Mr. Rochester. But anyway, that's a different kind of masculinity being performed. What's more is Austen's characterization of Frank reveals so much about the problem of the English gentleman at music. The problem of the English gentleman at music was highly nuanced because he was perceived as effeminate and foppish, not only because he was musical, but because of how his masculinity intersected with the performance of his social class, his gender, and his nationality. And Austen really captures this composite performance of identity that, taken all together, produces the character of the fop. It's this complicated nexus of identity that I want to explore with you all this evening, and to demonstrate that just what was at stake for an English gentleman who wanted to engage in music making during this period. The next slide, please. So the first thing that needs a bit of explaining is the cultural ambivalence in Austen's England towards music, because this can be a bit confusing. On the surface, it would seem to have been a ubiquitous and pretty unproblematic pastime for people in England. But when we look closely, we'll see that music making and musical skills were distributed very unevenly across English society, divided by boundaries of gender and class and nationality. It was very important for women of the middle and upper classes to cultivate some musical skills. But what conduct books make explicit is that women weren't supposed to be musical in order to attain any great virtuosity. Rather, it was a way of performing her social class to show that she had leisure time, that her parents had money to buy instruments and pay for lessons and sheet music, and that she didn't have to work, right? So it was a way of performing a kind of virtuous femininity. And we can see this very clearly in this particular conduct book excerpt, which really sums up most of the excerpts about music for women in the period. And I'll read the quote. "Music is not only a harmless amusement, but capable of being eminently beneficial to our fair countrywomen. It may be the means of preventing that vacuity of mind, which is too frequently the parent of libertinism, of precluding the intrusion of idle and dangerous imaginations, and by occupying a considerable portion of time, may prove an antidote to the poison insidiously administered by the innumerable licentious novels, which are hourly sapping the foundations of every moral and religious principle." I just love the kind of alarmist tone that these conduct books had, particularly for women. So we can see here that music making was largely a tool of domestication when it came to women. But then what about the men? There's much less conduct literature for men. And within that body of literature, they say much less about music for men. It was hardly talked about. But when it was, it sounded a bit like this. Next slide, please. "If you love music, hear it. Go to operas, concerts, and pay fiddlers to play for you. But I insist upon your neither piping nor fiddling. It puts a gentleman in a very frivolous, contemptible light, brings him into a great deal of bad company, and takes up a great deal of time, which might be much better employed. Few things would mortify me more than to see you bearing a part in a concert with a fiddle under your chin or a pipe in your mouth." And that's from the 4th Earl of Chesterfield to his son, who he was always very, very worried about. So let me decode this for you a little bit, because it's a lot to unpack. I've tried to underline and bold the important bits. First, I want to focus on the word frivolous, now it's being used here, because the word frivolous appears 46 times in Chesterfield's letters to his son. And half of those times, he's referring specifically to women. And the other 23 times, he's describing musicians and or Italians. So frivolous for him is a negative adjective, and one that is clearly linked to both music and effeminacy and this scary continental otherness that I'll talk about in just a little bit. Also, I want to draw your attention to bad company. Brings him into a great deal of bad company. So who could that be? Foreigners, right? Especially Italians, who were largely the population of music masters and musicians who were coming over from the continent to make a whole lot of money performing and publishing music in England. So the music profession was a profession, right? So men of a lower social class than like the gentleman nobility class were the musicians, right? So it has this sort of social ambiguity, and it's sort of connected to the continent, to people who are foreign. So that's what Chesterfield is concerned about when he's talking about bad company: low class and foreign. And the other bit that I think is worth pointing out is he's saying that he implores his son to pay fiddlers to play for you, that he would be mortified to see his son bearing part in a concert with a fiddle under his chin and a pipe in his mouth. So he's also very concerned about music making as a kind of labor of the body, something that a gentleman should not be exerting or doing in a way that they have the capital, the cultural and also actual capital, to pay musicians to perform for them, as opposed to doing that labor themselves, if that makes sense. So it's this sort of kind of layering of different things that compromise a gentleman's gentlemanliness that Chesterfield is pointing out in this quote. And his advice, Chesterfield's advice here, speaks to a more widespread policing of musical gentlemen that's confirmed by iconography of the period. If you'll go to the next slide, please. Musical men were portrayed as generally ridiculous, of low class, usually, or socially promiscuous, effeminate, and worst of all, foreigners, especially Italians, who, yes, those guys, who the English saw as a really threatening combination of all of those things. And here in this Hogarth painting, these two men here, one is a castrato, who I'll talk about a bit in a little bit, with the big sleeves and holding the music book. And behind him, this flute player is sort of visually, we understand that he's Italian because of his darker skin and because of his big nose. This was iconographically a way of denoting Italians, especially because he's playing the flute as a musician. This also codes him as Italian. And then next to him is the fop. Here is the English gentleman who's been corrupted by the effeminacy of Italian music, of Italy and music, right? There with his curling papers, sipping his chocolate. So, and I don't want to digress too much into what really should be its own presentation, but I can't emphasize enough just how much anxiety English moralists had about Italy and its influence on English culture. There was really a strong sense in the English imagination in this period that Italy was this land of total debauchery and sodomy and Catholicism, and that these were all somehow connected to each other and also connected to music, and especially to the opera. And the best way I can relate it for our modern audiences is sort of like the Satanic Panic of the 1980s. It was like that, but for Italian opera. And I'm not exaggerating. Like, people literally thought that Italian opera was a front for the Catholic Church. And there were you can find pamphlets on this. And you'd be hearing this beautiful music in Italian and not understanding it. And that actually you were hearing the Latin Mass. That was one of the fears. Go ahead and please go to the next slide, actually. I think I have a good quote. Yeah, so there's this real sense that Italian opera is one of the driving forces of the feminizing process that's going on in England in the middle of the 18th century. So we see here from Satan's Harvest Home. This is a real pamphlet. You can find it on Google Books. It's fascinating. Quote, since the introduction of Italian operas, here our men, that's here in England, our men are grown insensibly more and more effeminate. They used to go from a good comedy warmed with the fire of love and from a good tragedy stirred with the spirit of glory. They used to. But now they sit indolently and supine at an opera and suffer their souls to be sung away by the voices of Italian sirens. And that could be women sopranos or castrati, who were, I mean, I'm sure Jeffrey Nigro would have told you all about them, but I'll just reiterate here that they were really the foil to the English gentleman at music, to the proper English gentleman, a man whose body had been literally emasculated in service of highly virtuosic music making. That was the opposite of what the English gentleman was supposed to do musically. So he was the castrato was extremely threatening while also being a superstar in England. The next slide, please. Another quote I like from the Gentleman's Magazine in this period is sort of bemoaning the present state of England and the feminizing influence of foreigners. The proverb says justly, be merry and wise, but our national follies have clouded our eyes, and we've had our diversion so long. I may say that our money and courage are fiddled away, while softened by music's enervating charms, we forget our great ancestors glorious in arms. So two things going on here, right? You see this sense that music is getting sort of connected with foreignness, with effeminacy, and with that all like pleasures of the senses are getting sort of tied up in that too. And the other thing that I like to point out here is a sense that of great ancestors glorious in arms, and like from the first quote also this sense of that things were great before. maybe us Americans this might sound familiar, the sense of wanting to make England and English music kind of great again is a strong sense that you get from the moralists and the social commentators who feel that this foreign influence has had this really negative and specifically feminizing effect on what they see as like the natural, manly, and sober and chaste state of the English man. So, just to kind of summarize the last few points, that while we see that women were encouraged to attain a certain degree of musical skill, for men, it ran the risk of compromising their identity on three particular fronts: their masculinity, their gentility, that is their social class, and their Englishness. So under this climate, it should come as no surprise that English gentlemen left fewer traces of their music making. Oh, and actually, I think I've forgotten one slide. Can you go one more slide from this, please? Oh, yes, I had one more quote. I'm so sorry, I'm not used to not controlling my slides. One more quote from a conduct book of the period, just to give you a bit of extra sense of the tenor of this fear of foreign influences via music. That divine art, music, is at length dwindled into a woman's or a eunuch's effeminate trill, a eunuch there being the castrato. The chaste and solemn airs of Corelli, of Gimignani, the manly, pathetic, the astonishing strains of Handel are neglected and despised. Music is thus debased into effeminacy, right? So music is really becoming tied to effeminacy. And so naturally, it makes sense that an English gentleman might be then very reticent to take up music as a hobby. Or at least if he did, he might have been quieter about it. And so that's been really the crux of my research. And if you can go to the next set of slides, please. I had the sense that the English gentleman was still making music. He was there, but he's hard to catch in the act. So I'm reading through many diaries and letters of gentlemen of the period. I started to find these little snippets and miscellaneous sentences here and there that, taken all together, kind of paint this picture of the English gentleman actually having this very vibrant musical life, but just doing it kind of quietly and not writing so much about it. So a few little quotes here that I love. I love this quote from Lord Pembroke to William Hamilton, because it implies a relationship in music. "I wish you joy of the tenor," that's the viola. "My scraping continues, and I should be glad to join it to yours." But of course, the nobility had a bit more latitude about their music making. Thomas Hollis, someone whose papers I read and loved, he played on his flute quite a lot, and was a very devoted flute player, and actually played a lot of chamber music with other men, but was extremely quiet about it. And then this quote by Matthew Davenport, I love, that I found: "Spent the evening at Ron's with a young German bookseller. Still don't know what Ron's is. I think it was like a pub. Doesn't really matter. Who played well on the pianoforte. This, I understand, not uncommon in Germany for men to play this well." So here we see Davenport sort of confirming this sense that in England, it was weird to see a man playing an instrument like the forte piano, but in Germany it was not so strange. So this is all has been my research for many years now. And so imagine my delight when I realized a book I've read many times had really the best description of an English gentleman at music. Next slide, please. In Emma, all along, quote, "One accompaniment to Emma's song took her agreeably by surprise. A second, slightly, but correctly, taken by Frank Churchill. Her pardon was duly begged at the close of the song, and everything usual followed. He was accused of having a delightful voice and a perfect knowledge of music, which was properly denied, and that he knew nothing of the matter and had no voice at all, roundly asserted." I love that little Austen-ism, right? Everything usual followed. It's such a gift, I think, to the historian, or at least very tempting to read this and see this as a scene that might have happened in this way. So everything usual followed. he was accused of having a delightful voice and a perfect knowledge of music, which was properly denied, that he knew nothing of the matter and had no voice at all, roundly asserted. That's the interesting bit for me, that this seems to me like a way that maybe Austen had witnessed, perhaps, if we use our historical imagination a bit, a gentleman making music, and then the sort of way that the auditors and the gentleman himself navigated the kind of discomfort that might make, that a musical gentleman was something that had to be not apologized for exactly, but explained. And that this sort of back and forth of, oh, no, I have no voice at all, I know nothing about music, was part of the sort of social protocol or dance done in this particular setting to sort of massage the situation of Frank being so openly musical, showing off his talents in this way, because it's pretty complicated what's described. Yeah, it sounds like he walks up behind Emma, who's at the piano, playing and accompanying her own song she's singing, and he picks up, he creates a harmony or reads another. If there's another line, he might read another line, and doing that at sight. I don't know if those musicians among you could imagine that's not so easy. That's something that takes some skill. More remarkable still is what follows. Next slide, please. Towards the end of Jane's second song, oh, I'm so sorry. More remarkable is what follows, because he after saying that he has no voice at all, right? He still goes on to sing one more song with Emma, and then 2 songs with Jane Fairfax. And then a third song is even proposed. And Frank seems to have been very glad to keep singing, but Jane's voice is getting tired. So here the quote reads, "Towards the end of Jane's second song, her voice grew thick. Another song, however, was soon begged for. One more. They would not fatigue Miss Fairfax on any account, and would only ask for one more. And Frank Churchill was heard to say, 'I think you could manage this without effort. The first part is so very trifling. The strength of the song falls all on the second.'" And this is hilarious and wrong for so many reasons, right? Because he's cajoling her in order to display his own talents, right? And really the role of the gentleman musician in this period in Austen's England was to support the woman musician, whether be it at the piano, singing usually a second line, which would not have been necessarily harder than the soprano line, than the upper line, or in the case of instrumental music, to play, for example, an accompanied sonata, which was a sonata that was designed really for the keyboard, with a violin or a flute, or in some cases a cello, sort of doubling the bass or improvising on the bass, to accompany a woman who would have really practiced the piece, and the gentleman might come in and just sight read because his part was easier, or ad libitum. And I think I have, are the videos next, Maisie? Yeah, so pause just 1 second. So let me explain what you're about to see. So I wanted to show you a bit of how I imagined this scene of music making with a kind of duet singing, and then also an accompanied sonata, which I've just described. This is taken from my class called Music and Gender in Jane Austen's England, the salon concert that my students and I put on last year with a few of my colleagues. And here they're singing From Night Till Morn, which is one of the songs in one of Austen's music books. And you'll see what's a bit different from this scene in Emma is that instead of accompanying her own voice, the pianist here is playing the piano part, and then there are 2 singers, and the lower part is being sung by the young woman with the dark brown hair. So you can go ahead and play this. Thank you. And then the next video I'll show is of a company sonata, me playing with the same pianist. And here you get the sense of the spatial relationship of it, of a young woman playing at the piano and a flute player or a violinist probably reading over her shoulder. So also there's some proximity that was, I think, desirable, or maybe sometimes undesirable, but in courtship, it would have been desirable, I think. And you can hear in my flute part that it's really the piano part is sufficient unto itself. And the flute part is just sort of adding, sometimes conversing, but really it doesn't add so very much. And you can go ahead and play that, please. Yes, and we can maybe talk in the Q&A more about this concept I have of salon concert as a pedagogical tool. But so this gives you, or I hope it gives you, an idea of the look and sound of the sort of domestic music making that Austen describes, and how gentlemen musicians played a supporting role to their female musical counterparts. So this also adds to the sense that of how inappropriate Frank was acting in this moment, how vain and how, I would say, foppish he was acting by cajoling Jane Fairfax into just another song that, oh, your part is so very trifling. It's all the strength of it all falls on me. So then coming back to this musical scene in Emma, I want to point out that when Jane's voice grows tired, Mr. Knightley, ever the gentleman, intervenes to prevent Frank from pressuring Jane to keep singing. And then, crucially, slide, please. Here ceased the concert portion of the evening, for Miss Woodhouse and Miss Fairfax were the only young lady performers. So this is significant for a number of reasons. It would suggest, first, that Frank could not have continued singing because there was something improper about a gentleman singing by himself in a domestic setting, because he could have, for example, if Mrs. Weston had wanted to accompany, Frank could have sung if it was appropriate. But there seems like there was something inappropriate about that, or else that would have been perhaps suggested, because then the suggestion of dancing is promoted, right? And Mrs. Weston, who seems to be a very accomplished pianist, is asked to play for the dances. And significantly also, she is not asked to sing, right? And I get this, I have the sense that, and Austen sort of refers to this, and this might be something we can talk about in the Q&A as well, that once women are married, they tend to give up their music. And Mrs. Weston clearly is still playing enough to be able to play for these dances, but the fact that she is not asked to sort of exhibit her talent, I think, shows that that space was much more intended for young ladies sort of on the marriage market to sort of display themselves, display their skills, and not for married women or for men on their own. And there are a few reasons I think that this is two issues really of gender and of social class. So first, we'll talk a bit about class. There's, as I mentioned before, the music profession was a profession, right? So it put men already at a sort of lower social status than all of the assembled guests here at this party of in the novel. And there's only one example of a man singing solo in mixed company in Austen's novels. I'm curious if anyone might know it. If you know it, you can drop it in the chat. Any example of a man singing solo in mixed company, so men and women, in any of Austen's novels? Anyone know? It's also in Emma. I'm going to be so impressed. Next slide, please. Mr. Martin had gone 3 miles, not Mr. Martin, it's his shepherd boy, but I'm going to get there. Mr. Martin had gone 3 miles round one day in order to bring Harriet some walnuts because she had said how fond she was of them. And in everything else, he was so very obliging. He had his shepherd's son into the parlor. Yes, the parlor one night on purpose to sing to her. She was very fond of singing. He could sing a little himself. So this is the only situation in which a male, is asked to sing in mixed company. And it has to do with his class, that he could be asked to come in and sing, sort of to, perform in this setting. And so in that way, in this issue of class, it was a little bit appropriate for Frank to have continued singing on his own. And also this sort of issue of gender. Actually, sorry, I don't want to get to gender yet. I want to stay a little bit longer on class because this is another thing that makes Frank Churchill a bit foppish. This sort of sense that he's very socially promiscuous, that he doesn't have the proper sense of boundaries of class, which was also a big concern of moralists during this period, especially around music making. It was an activity that could allow for a lot of mixture across different social classes. Indeed, next slide, please. Frank Churchill is often more intent on his own sort of pleasure than in maintaining class boundaries. And this comes about when they're trying to plan the ball at the Crown Inn. He said here, he, that is Frank, could not be persuaded that so many good-looking houses as he saw around him could not furnish numbers enough for such a meeting. And even when the particulars were given and families described, he was still unwilling to admit that the inconvenience of such a mixture would be anything, or that there would be the smallest difficulty in everybody returning to their proper place the next morning. And Emma observes that his indifference to a confusion of rank bordered too much on inelegance of mind. So we know that this is sort of already problematic about Frank, that he doesn't have such a sense of class boundaries. And it's true that Emma was a big snob. I'm not arguing otherwise, but also that Frank had just a different idea of what was appropriate, and I think Emma's sort of sense of maintaining class boundary aligns much more with moralists and social commentators of the period, who were also very concerned about that. So if we return then to, what was I going to say? Yes, coming now to gender, about the problem of Frank singing by himself, singing without the accompaniment of another young woman in that setting. Next slide, please. I want to return to this scene because Mr. Knightley's reaction is really crucial here, I think. When Frank wants to keep singing, ignoring Jane's voice becoming tired, Mr. Knightley grew angry. "That fellow," said he indignantly, "thinks of nothing but showing off his own voice. This must not be." So Mr. Knightley constantly criticizes Frank throughout the novel. And it really illuminates Frank's characterization as the fop, because Mr. Knightley is exactly the opposite, right? He is the proper English gentleman, and also with regard to his relationship to music, which is basically non-existent, except that he appreciates it. He can listen to it. He's a good listener. Yeah. If you'll go then to the next slide, please. Here, Mr. Knightley criticizes Frank for his weakness of character and not coming to his father's wedding. He calls into question his manliness in his handwriting, right? That he has a woman's hand; it's so weak, right? And also, he even calls into question his Englishness here in this quote about his use of French words in his letters. He may be very aimable, he have very good manners and be very agreeable, but he can have no English delicacy towards the feelings of other people. Nothing really amiable about him. That he can be only amiable in French, right? So calling into question all of these components of his gentlemanliness. And if I can share a quote, share an opinion now, I think I have time to share that opinion, which I have found is both provocative and unpopular. I tend to think that Mr. Knightley's discomfort with Frank and sort of hatred of him, yes, there's some jealousy about Emma, but I think there's some like latent homoeroticism there. And I'm thinking especially of drawing from Eve Sedgwick's concept of like the homosocial triangle. But anyway, I'm going to just drop that bomb and let it explode in the Q&A about the homoerotics between Frank and Mr. Knightley. So next slide, please. Frank amplifies his own association between himself and the continent that Mr. Knightley brings up here, saying that he can only be amiable in French, by talking about going to the continent. Here he talks about going on his grand tour. As soon as my aunt gets well, I shall go abroad. I shall never be easy till I've seen some of these places. You'll have my sketches some time or other to look at, or my tour to read, or my poem. I'm sick of England. I would leave it tomorrow if I could, right? So of course, when he says, when you'll have my tour to read, he's referring to the common practice of young English men finishing their formal education with a tour of the European continent. Traditionally, they visit France, Switzerland, and Italy before returning to England. And the Grand Tour was meant to impress upon young men the weighty cultural legacy of Western Europe, and to offer them an opportunity to practice their language skills, refine their manners. But a recurring complaint in conduct literature and in periodicals in the period was that young men returned from their tour excessively feminized. Next slide, please. And here's just a smattering of my three favorites of these complaints. The Grand Tour strengthens effeminacy and ignorance. Every foreign folly, effeminacy, or vice at once take root and flourish. The young nobility and gentry return more depraved and foolish than they went, scorning everything sober, sedate, and manly. They never rest till they've instructed our youth at home in yet higher forms of amusement and licentiousness as possible. So then you get the sense of like this fear of bringing these problems back home to England. And then this is a very good one here at the end, a taste in music and of painting. And you would want but one taste more to be as accomplished as the finest gentleman Italy sends us back. And that is a reference to sodomy, which folks in England thought it was like the thing that was happening on the continent, especially in Italy. So that's the one taste more euphemism. So next slide, please. So poor Frank, right? And really poor English gentlemen in that time who wanted to be musical. And they were there. They definitely were there. But it was no easy feat to be a gentleman in this period. A gentleman, or a man who aspired to be perceived as one, had to be polite but without affectation, well-dressed but not foppish. And if he dared to be musical, he shouldn't be too eager to display his skills, or at least not in certain company. The performance of gentlemanliness in Austen's time was a composite performance of gender, class, and nationality. How to be manly, how to be gentlemanly, and how to be an English gentleman. Any slippage from manly to effeminate, from gentlemanly to low class, from English to foreign, threatened to compromise the entire performance. And English gentlemen were therefore discouraged from pursuing music as a hobby because it had the potential to compromise the performance of their gentlemanliness on all three fronts. Its association with effeminacy, its association with men working in the music profession, and its association with continental otherness. There were musical English gentlemen who had vibrant musical lives, but they left fewer traces of their musical activities, which is why this example of Frank Churchill is so valuable for the historian. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lydia. That was really fascinating. And we've got lots of comments and lots of questions in the chat as well.
Oh, I see that. That's great.
Yeah. Sure. I'm just gonna throw this out there first so I don't forget it. I just came across a painting in an exhibition that Cheryl Butler put together in Southampton of Jane Austen's Southampton Circle. And we're going to have an essay about this in Persuasions Online coming up. But it's a painting of the Morse and Caper family. They were biracial West Indian, actually Jamaican heir and heiresses. And the Anne Morse, the one of the daughters of the family, is sitting at the pianoforte or the harpsichord, I can't remember which, and her brother, I think it's Robert, I'm not sure of his name. Anyway, he has a cello. And so, I mean, I thought that was very interesting. They were fabulously wealthy, but also working their way into, upper class or aristocratic British society. But here is this cello sitting there. Well, not sitting there, being held. So I just thought that would be an interesting little footnote for you.
Tell me again the name of the family, of the gentleman.
They're the Morses. Yeah, I'll send you what
Morse, like M-O-R-S-E or M?
Right.
Okay.
M-O-R-S-E. Yeah.
That's interesting, and I didn't talk about it. I might have mentioned it briefly, but there's also as you go up the social ladder in England in this period, there's so much more latitude for what you could get away with. So the men whose diaries and letters I've read who are titled gentry, like sirs and who have a title, I find that they are much more open about their musical pursuits. They write about it. They're painted their portraits with an instrument in a subdued, an appropriate way. I'm thinking those of you know Richard Leppert's wonderful book Music and Image talks a lot about this, about the ways that music making for even members of the nobility had to be sort of put in context of their other pursuits as men and within the context of their social class.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Sarah, do you have a question? Yeah.
Well, yeah. I'm going to turn to some of the ones that we've starred. I can't decide where to begin. I mean, several that are
there's so many good ones. I'm just
maybe I'll just start with the first one that I see because it occurred to me as well. I'm intrigued. Our guest says that I'm intrigued now by Autumn de Wilde's choice to show Mr. Knightley playing in Emma in 2020, and it is such a distinctive scene.
I know.
Scene. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I about had a fit when I saw that. I thought, why was I not consulted for this film? I mean, he's a wonderful. They had to because the actor is like a famous singer, I guess, and he's great, and it's a great song, and I appreciate. I mean, I love the soundtrack to that.
That's great.
Good job with his historically accurate instruments and performance practice, and also capturing this like really domestic sound of the music, because often when you find recordings of ballads, for example, from that period, they're sung so operatically with a vocal style that I think was not necessarily what would have been always heard. And I think there's a bit of, as a historical performer, I'm allergic to the word authenticity, but something a bit more possible historically in those recordings. But impossible that Mr. Knightley played the violin and sang. I say, but tell me if you think I'm wrong. At least not publicly. But
I trust your
Yeah.
opinion.
I have to have this conversation with my students. It's great because my students, we read Emma and they get, this whole lecture over the course of a block, and then they watch that adaptation and they're like, but Professor Chang, Mr. Knightley, look at this, and they're equally scandalized like I am.
You're doing it right then.
Oh, I see a question. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I should let you moderate.
There's a bunch of questions about the Navy and naval men.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
So first of all, Sarah Bowen points out that in chapter 8 of Persuasion, Captain Wentworth sits down at the pianoforte to try to make out an air, but leaves when Anne approaches. And she says it's not clear how well he plays or whether he just dabbles. And then Gillian Dooley points out that Matthew Flinders, the famous British navigator, played the flute and collaborated with other British officers in chamber music. And later on, she says that she thinks it was kind of common for naval officers to play music, but she's not sure about a cello on a ship. Maybe other instruments, smaller ones, would have been more portable. And somebody else, Mary Wilson Molan mentions Master and Commander, where we have Aubrey and Maturin playing the cello and the violin while they were at sea. And she wonders, would this have been common in situations where there were no young lady performers available? So that's a whole bunch of naval things for you to answer.
So interesting. And so I think spot on, a lot of you with your instincts there of how, that would have been negotiated differently in the male space of a naval ship. Actually, I'm thinking now, tying that to glee clubs in a way, because I saw another question about glee clubs, but I'll get to that. Try to remind me if I lose my train of thought. But I don't know a lot about that homosocial space of the naval ship, but I have the sense that there was in England, I mean, they loved the Navy, but there was a sense that maybe men could have gotten up to things that were unsavory, right? Like there's the sense of maybe, and I use the word sodomy here to use the historically accurate sort of word to describe these relationships, sexual relationships between men that were not distinctly homosexual, because that wasn't really an identity yet. So like a space where there was the danger of sodomy, and we get that in Mansfield Park a bit, right, with the rears and vices. So yeah. I get the sense that it's kind of a what's the cool, like heterotopoi, like a different space, like an alternate space where maybe different rules applied, or perhaps because women weren't present, that men could be different, could engage in music in a way uncensored. I don't know, but it's something it's sort of on my research list next to investigate that space. I wanted to come back to the great observation about Captain Wentworth, because I love that scene. What a great moment, for so many reasons, right? But it's one that I recently recreated with my students. I had a student who was not had somewhat of not a musical background, but kind of was familiar with what a piano keyboard could do, sort of mechanically, and asked her to sit down and try to play Happy Birthday. And I sort of, and then what came out was not exactly correct, but it eventually she got it. And I wondered if it was a bit like that with
Oh, wow. I love that idea.
because we were wondering about it in class, and so we thought, well, let's try it out.
Yeah.
Someone who doesn't really play the keyboard and see if you can find it. And just because the keyboard visually, spatially you can sort of find your way. And he was there, and he was there with the Miss Musgroves, right? So he was kind
Yeah.
of flirting, and maybe they could help him. So then the piano becomes this sort of social instrument of courtship, even if the man is not playing it actually. But then Wentworth, and then there's so much more to say about him being a kind of different, performing his masculinity so differently than Austen's other gentlemen, being more of the 19th century gentleman of sensibility, right?
So do you want to circle back to the homosocial space of the Glee Club?
Oh yeah, I do. Thank you. And so somebody asked about Glee clubs, and very right to ask about them. The Noblemen and Gentlemen's Catch Club was one that I wrote about a lot in my dissertation, and there is a lot of literature about it. It was founded in 1761 in London, and the way that the club was managed was with a lot of rules about what kind of memberships there were based on your social class, and who sat where at the table, and who called the first song, and who how they drank wine, like how much wine and when, and who sat next to. There was like just a lot of rules of decorum that could manage the different levels of social class and the music making that was going on. So they would have, for example, and we get this from William Gardner's wonderful memoir, Recollections of a Dilettante, I think, or Music and Friends. I forget exactly the title. William Gardner. He was invited by a gentleman who was a member of the club, and he describes sitting at this long table next to the Duke of Argyll and then another lord on his other side. And he was a self-described musical amateur gentleman. He was a poetry manufacturer, but he was sort of at that weird place of having a lot of money and owning land and owning the factories that were manufacturing the stockings. But he did not feel like he belonged with the nobility. And then at the other end of the table were the few professional singers, the professional men, who were privileged members of the club. They didn't have voting rights in the club, but they were allowed to come because they were great singers. And so they could stiffen the ensemble, like make the singing better and more fun for the gentlemen and noblemen who were not as skilled singers. So Gardner describes this moment where, as a guest, he is asked to call the first song, to choose the first song, and then he can choose which singers he wants to come up and stand behind him and read the glee with him. And Gardner describes being extremely uncomfortable with this, of like, I could not presume to call up the most eminent, musicians of London, to come up and sing with me. But the lords who were all around him said, no, that's what they're here for. And so they, call them up. So anyway, I'm going into minute detail here because I think it's important to describe why these homosocial spaces, I can't speak to the naval ship, but glee clubs, because they had these really strict rules that everything was still managed within a kind of with decorum that made it so that the social classes didn't really slip, that they mixed, but they stayed, that the boundaries were intact, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and the distinctiveness of those roles feels very military. Because it at once mimics the social world outside of the space of Glee Club, but it also is distinctive to Glee Club, right? And that feels a little bit like a naval ship.
Yeah, I'd never thought to connect those two, and I'm so glad that they came up in this context because I never would have thought of them together, but they're worth exploring kind of side by side, I think.
Yeah. But you'd also need, in both cases, and maybe less so in the Glee Club, you'd need some instruction, right? I mean, at some point, you can't just get on a ship and then say, hey, I think I'll learn to play the flute or, the violin. So I'm just kind of curious about what, how widespread or how narrowly defined musical instruction might have been for the gentleman in use. And was it ever part of a school curriculum? If, for instance, at, I don't know, Winchester College or something like that?
I think singing was, but not playing on an instrument.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's so interesting.
because singing would have
It
been important.
suggests you know how to read music. I mean, it suggests you have a familiarity with, but the idea of translating that to an instrument without formal instructions.
Right. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think singing could have easily been part of a condonable kind of curriculum at school, and because it's necessary for worship, for church. Right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you'd think that if they were singing hymns every Sunday, I mean, and I suppose hymn books, included the music.
Well, and the
There would-
organist, right? I mean, who's
Yeah,
the organist in this situation?
Yeah.
but the
Mhm.
organist wouldn't necessarily have been a gentleman, right?
No, he would have been of the music profession, of a professional class. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That does kind of lead to one question I'm seeing in the chat, which was kind of asking if you could clarify about certain instruments associated with certain genders.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
their example I have read of women performing on keyboard instruments, but not on flute. I mean, can you expand a little bit on that?
Certainly, yeah. Very good question. And basically, keyboard instruments and the harp were the instruments that were allowable for women, largely because it doesn't disrupt her body. Like you could sit like this, and then you put your hands up at the keyboard, and you haven't sort of disrupted the way that your body looks. So a lot of this is being mediated through the male gaze, of course. And the harp is comes about a bit later and is kind of sexy for a variety of reasons. A lot because it's positioned kind of between the legs, and you can see a little bit of ankle. Like it invites also the gaze like into the body in a different way than the keyboard. But wind instruments were completely out of the question for women. Flutes especially were too phallic, and they all but say that in the conduct literature for why you shouldn't play the flute if you're a woman. But also it contorts your face, right? And same with the violin. This was a gesture of a sort of positioning of the body that through the male gaze did not seem ladylike. So also I've argued elsewhere, not everyone agrees with me, but I think that instruments like the flute and the violin and even the cello are quite portable. They reflect like masculine movement in the world, whereas keyboard instruments are like furniture. They anchor a woman to the domestic space. So there's also that element of it. But yes, so the instruments were definitely gendered in that way.
Back to the Glee for a moment. It popped into my head in Mansfield Park that Mary Crawford trips over to the pianoforte to join the Glee. That I assume it includes the two Miss Bertrams, but does it also include Henry Crawford?
I think it could. I think Glee singing could have been done in mixed company. I think. I don't see any reason why not.
I mean, Tom and Edmund are definitely not going over to sing. Edmund's kind of approaching to watch, But I was just curious about. I mean, because if Henry Crawford is there, then that puts him in a little bit of a Frank Churchill-ish position. Singing.
Yeah, I think it's very plausible in that situation that he's over there because either way, so many boundaries have already been pushed, right? To do with performance and whatever else. So why not this as well?
Yeah. And also, I think Glee singing is so different than singing a ballad where you're sort of the visual focal point, like the performer. Whereas Glees are somehow, you sing them kind of around the piano and you're collaborating, you're singing to each other more than like performing outward. So
Yeah.
maybe that would also be.
Yeah, well, that would be great
Mhm.
because you know who he's singing to, both Mariah and Julia.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I never thought about
Mhm.
who would be singing in that scene besides the ladies. But Glee's could be in three voices,
Mhm.
or four, or more.
Yeah. I just never even thought about the musical aspect of that before this your talk and this QMA.
Mhm.
Now, Alison Thompson has brought up that John Locke, who's of course earlier than Chesterfield, adored the gentleman, should learn the principles of music and dance, but shouldn't overly practice them as they were ephemeral arts, and therefore wasteful, unlike hunting or warfare.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And exactly. So then there's, I don't think I mentioned this, but was a sense that also not all music making was the same.
Mhm.
There was music making on an instrument, like I use this, where you're sort of making the music, right, or reproducing the music, right, and then there's musical composition, and that's a
Mhm.
labor of the mind and not of the body.
Mhm.
And so there was a sense of like music theory and composition being more masculine ways of engaging with music. And this is why I've argued elsewhere that I think Mary Bennett gets sort of gendered male, like gets made masculine, because
Mhm.
her pursuit of music is through, she studies the thorough bass. She would have been thinking more in terms of this sort of academic composition focused study of music, the inner workings of it, and not so much the reproduction of it, though she does play quite a lot.
Mhm.
Well, and of course, it's implied not especially well. So that sort of underscores your theory, right? Which is where her attention is directed more.
Well, actually, it's interesting you say that, because I think our initial impression of Mary is that she doesn't play well, but actually, if you read closely, she plays really well. She just does it
Too
wrong.
long. Yeah.
Yeah, she's doing it in such a way that's not correct for a young lady,
Mhm.
because she plays concertos, and this is also a genre that's coded masculine because it would have been performed in public for money
Mhm.
by a professional man, and not in a domestic setting. Um, Even though there were piano reductions of
Yeah.
concertos, it's not it was skews masculine because of the space in which it would have normally been heard, and
Yeah.
the person who would have normally played it. But yeah, so composition, when there are suggestions that men can learn something about music in literature, in conduct literature, like John Locke and Chesterfield, it has more to do with the science of music, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she also kind of misreads her audience, doesn't she? Because I mean, here she is at a party and nobody wants to listen to a concerto. They want dances and songs and all
Right.
that kind of stuff.
The fun stuff, yeah.
Yeah, we have I think the latest issue of Persuasions 46, there's an article by Catherine Libman on the thorough bass aspect of Mary's
Oh,
interest.
great. Yeah.
Yes, so you need to look at that.
I'm excited
It's
to read that. That's
it's
great.
really neat, actually.
Yeah, good.
Okay, here's another interesting question from Jane Axelrod, who says she's read about English gentlemen playing in private trios or quartets for their own amusement, and how common was that?
I think it's much more common than the historic record tends to show.
Uh-huh.
I have found just little snippets here and there in diaries, and it's, sometimes you come across a gentleman who will talk a little bit more about the music he's making, but it depends so much on different facets of his biography, right? Of how high up on the social ladder he is, or how low. If he's more like closer to the professional class of musicians, and it makes more sense when he's writing about being musical. But that gentleman class is so slippery up and down, and
Yeah.
always running the risk of sort of slipping downwards.
Yeah.
And so they had to be just a bit more cautious about how they presented. But then once you read for the nobility, like who's one of these gentlemen I've read? There's a Thomas Brand, and I'm going to forget the name of his friend, but there's a great cache of letters between them. And the friend was higher up socially and was always writing to Thomas Brand about the music he was playing on the grand tour, and this great crisis of like having his dad send his viola with him in a chest, but he'd put his ice skates in with the viola and had broken it, and it was a disaster, and he was going to cry. And so like there's this I've gotten the impression that the gentlemen who are more eager to share in letters and in their diaries about their musical pursuits are the ones who are higher up on the social ladder.
Mm-hmm.
I think of John Maldi also. Very good.
That's true for theatricals as well. I mean, the people who are way up there, the kind of titled nobility, they're inviting everybody and selling tickets, and and they're not worried about what role they're playing or anything like that. Whereas the further on down you get, the more worrisome it could potentially be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right. The more private it needs to be, I guess.
I think since we are talking about class, there's a question about, were there choir boys in churches in the late 18th, early 19th centuries? What class would they have come from?
That's a great question, about which I don't know very much. But if I think back to the mentions of choir boys, that, at least in one instance that I have in my memory, could have been a place where different social classes couldn't mix. Thinking of a Lord Fitzwilliam. Yeah, a Lord Fitzwilliam who became friends with a cellist named John Crosdill, who was the cello teacher of George IV, the Prince of Wales. But he was a professional musician, he was of the professional class, and so he mixed across all strata of society. But he had this longtime friend in the Lord Fitzwilliam, and one account I found was that friendship had started when they were choir boys together, and so their friendship crossed class boundaries in a way that was a little bit not awesome. But the fact that Crosdill was also associated with the court and Fitzwilliam was a lord, I think people kind of looked the other way about it. But anyway, that's the instance that I can think of off the top of my head that I've encountered where there were choir boys of different social classes, and that's where they mixed. Mm-hmm. Yes, the Prince Regent played the cello. I just saw that pop up.
Yeah. This is more of a personal question, sort of. Jeannie Kleiber says, was that a wooden flute you were playing? Its tone was lovely, and would that be the kind of flute played in Jane Austen's time?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I actually have one here if you'd like to see it.
Yes.
I just happened to have it. I actually didn't think I was going to whip out a flute today. Actually, what I have in this case is not the same flute I was playing. The flute I was playing in that clip you heard is a replica of a flute by Kirst, the maker who supplied the Prussian military of Frederick the Great, and also I think was the workshop in which some flutes of Frederick's were made, Frederick the Great. So it's my late classical flute. I like it for late 18th century music, and also even some early Beethoven. This flute, I'm really actually excited to show it off to you all, is an original instrument from 1815 or so.
Oh,
and from England. And the flute I played in the video was made of blackwood, and this is made of boxwood. It's just so old that it's very dark. So I'll try to hold it up.
Yeah.
And you can see the stamp, the maker's mark, Christopher Garrock of London. You see his
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
workshop address, Cornhill.
Wow.
And I pull it out like that because it really wants to be at A442 or so. So I have to pull it out to be at A440. You see the holes are quite big.
Yeah.
That was common in English flutes at the time. They really liked that big, loud, reedy sound. And that's the one key in the stamp. And these are all ivory rings. But I don't know if how the sound will come out, but I'll play a little bit.
Wow.
Wow, that was wildly good sound given the circumstances.
I know, I was a bit surprised to know.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What does the key do?
It makes it fully chromatic, so it helps it go. It helps you play in all of the keys, basically. So it gives you an F sharp, a D sharp. It vents the air in such a way that you can access some pictures that you wouldn't without it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. When did the modern flute with the keys and everything come in?
That's a great question. So they were starting to add keys to flutes in this period, actually. And so you'll see flutes from this period that have 2 keys, 4 keys, 6 keys, 8 keys, up to like 14 keys. From about 1760 is when they started adding keys on flutes. But the one key flute persists into the 19th century because, and I can tell you from experience, it's really hard to learn the new fingering systems. And so if you're used to playing on this flute like this, why would you learn a new system? All the keys do is they make certain notes, like I'll show you F natural instead of F sharp. I'll demonstrate an F natural and an F sharp. Do you notice how much louder the F sharp can be?
Yeah.
That's because a lot of the notes on what's this called a simple system flute have to be cross-fingered. So they don't actually exist sonically on the instrument. You kind of have to make them. So for the F, you play a G, and then you do this to get close to the pitch of an F. But it's not perfect, and you have to kind of, it's a note you have to find, basically. So what the keys do is they make that note more, exist more robustly on the instrument. And then when we get to, let's see, I actually wrote an article about this, about the flutist Charles Nicholson, and how he came about at a time in England when they were wanting like English music to be great again and manly. And Nicholson played a flute like this, but he had just he'd made the hole so huge so that he could get this big, loud, reedy, masculine sound. And audiences loved him. He was like the hero of English music. And he was like big, like he was barrel chested and tall and had these big hands. And they basically, if you read newspaper like reviews of his concerts, the English were saying, "Oh, he's so much better than those like pansy flute players they send us from the continent. Like he's so manly in English." And he started to build flutes to be able to make the sound that he was making on his instrument, because he had altered his simple system flute beyond anyone's ability to play on it. Like it was unplayable by anyone but him. So he worked with flute makers to create a flute that could make that same sound. And what he made was a flute with many keys and a metal lining on the inside of the head joint. And then this German emigre flute player heard Nicholson in London and said, "I can't compete with that. I have to, the only way I can compete with that is to make a better flute, like make a flute that does that." And so that was Theobald Bohm, and he is the Bohm of the Bohm system flute that we have today.
Yeah.
So he was so inspired by Nicholson's playing that he made the metal bone flute that we know. He invented a whole new system of keys
Wow.
for that. So yeah, English masculinity gave us the bone flute, basically.
Yeah,
Just
musical
by
made my beer,
accident.
you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really funny. Oh, Patricia Mersman says that your first slide refers to the game of flats, and she wants to know, what is that?
I don't know. I guess it's some kind of gambling card game. I don't fully know. That whole pamphlet is so funny. I really recommend everyone go and Google. It's on Google Books. Google thinks that Satan wrote it. It's called Satan's Harvest Home, and there's no author. It's
That's
anonymous.
the author.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, good. He's a busy guy.
Yeah.
But it talks all about basically everything that English moralists were afraid of at the time. I forget what else is part of the title. The present state of whorecraft, other things. But there's a whole chapter on the Italian opera.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, it's lesbian sex. Oh, that's what it is.
Oh, okay.
What? Oh, my goodness.
Thank you.
Wow.
Mystery solved.
Wow.
Yeah. It also, there's a whole section about kissing and like how bad it is that women kiss each other, but how much worse it is when men kiss each other. It's called Satan's Harvest Home.
Uh-huh. Well, this has been so educational.
I'm so glad we could end on that.
We kind of need to stop.
Okay,
So, and what a way, or what topic to end on.
I'm delighted.
Going out with a bang.
Yeah.
So yeah, or something. So Lidia, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone in our audience.
Yes.
We want to invite you back on Saturday, November 1st for our next event. Janice Brooks is going to be giving a talk that explores how music making shaped perceptions of peoples and lands far beyond the British home. So join us for her talk, Jane Austen, Home and Away.
And if it's getting to be cooler weather in your neck of the woods, why not cozy up to any of our previous programs on the website, which contains the archive of all our previous lectures, over 50 of them, on topics ranging from Austen's daily music practice and music books, to the work of Regency textile designer Anna Maria Garthwaite, to multicultural adaptations of Jane Austen. We have enjoyed bringing you this thought-provoking programming for the past 5.5 years.
Yes, and thank you so much again for attending tonight's presentation, and thank you so much again, Lidia, for a really delightful talk, and I can't wait to the Tucson AGM to hear what you're going to tell us then. Those of you who are still in the audience, please consider donating to Jane Austen and Company. Every contribution helps us to continue to provide new Austen-related content. And have a good night and a good weekend, everyone. This is a really fun way to start things off.
Thank you, Lidia.
That was so fun.